All right, let's go. It's 11:11, so that's our sign to start. Between you and I, before we even record, I just invite you to take a nice deep breath. Let it go. Great. Welcome everyone to your Inner Design podcast, where we explore the inner systems that shape how we live, lead, create, and thrive. Today's guest is Dr. Deb Rivera, who is a PhD in neuroengineering from UCLA, a scientist, an inventor, an associate professor for Center for Care and Cures at the University of Eindhoven. And she's the founder of Journeymetrics. Her work explores the hidden biology behind stress, resilience, recovery, and well-being. What excites me about this conversation is that she helps bring scientific language to something that I deeply believe in, how our inner design shapes our outer life. Dr. Deb, welcome.
Thanks so much, Rubina. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I was, thinking about our conversation, and I often use the phrase inner design to describe the internal architecture that shapes our emotions, our choices, our energy, and how we lead in life. And I'm wondering from your scientific lens, how real is that concept?
It is so valid and so real that I think it's extremely important that we all start to recognize that our cellular metabolism and our behaviors influence each other dramatically.
How much is human performance determined internally before the strategy even begins of our expression outwardly?
You got to think it's foundational. Sure, there's genetics, but there's a whole set of exposures that we collect from even before birth to the moment we're living. And our mental framing is so crucial to how we perceive, how we analyze, and how we execute.
Do most people underestimate how much biology influences mindset?
Honestly, Rubina, I'm going to say most people, and I'm going to include neuroscientists in that as well.
Tell me more about that. I would love to know, you know, it sounds like to me that many people think they have a discipline problem and when actually maybe they have a regulation problem.
Emotional regulation, I would say, is a big part of it. It's almost as if our society is rigged on stress, right? We're having this cortisol flow. Yeah, if you get the right amount of stress, it'll cause you to perform better. But if you have too much stress, it'll actually prevent you from having any creativity.
Yeah, what's that right amount of stress? Is it measurable? Because I feel like I agree with that. We need to keep ourselves active, right? Even our heart needs to pump, which sometimes can create, I mean, you're you're the one with the background in all of the scientific research, but I feel like that's amount is good for us. Daily cardio, getting the heart pumping and things like that, which can be categorized under stress, but like where does that line fall off and we're now just at too much?
Pulsed versus chronic. So if you can
Okay.
have a stress, reset, and continue, then you've just built your stress resilience. It's once we're under chronic stress that our systems start to erode. We shift into a metabolic state that's less efficient. We have this one inflammatory marker called IL-6 that floods the system and makes us less social beings. So it's like we have these feedback loops that are who we are, if you will. So there's a framing of biology where we're process oriented rather than cell oriented. So the fundamental unit of life not being the cell, but the process is built on these complex systems that are feeding back towards each other. It can be very stable when you have these redundancies, but there's also a chance that everything will collapse. And it happens when we're in a state of chronic stress.
I love to hear that because I talk about process orientation all the time, but from the creative output side of it, working with designers, working out there in the field. And I think that, when I look at society overall, I always say that we are so outcome driven, we're product oriented, and nobody talks about the process. And for a creative person, it's almost a matter of life or death. I think the creative process, being in it, being able to have design principle thinking and come to creative problem solving, all of that is process that really doesn't come in the product. It does and it doesn't. It does in the sense that depending how your process is, you'll see that obviously in the outcome and the reflection of it. But we measured that outcome over the process. And so from that production lens that I look at it from, can you tell me from, the neuroscience lens of it, what is the process? What are the outcome driven stressors that we have? What's happening in our brain? And that so that people can hear what they need to be doing or not doing maybe.
Sure. There's a lot there. I'd love to double back on process. First, just to say, I think the reason why we're so wired for input as opposed to the process would just be because it's easier to measure. So that'd be one. And then part of how it's easier to measure is even things like observing and speech tend to break things down into the singular unit rather than looking at the full system. So process orientation is a very system or integrative way of going forward. And it's just tricky to measure. So the process of stress is that regardless of whether it's a chemical exposure, a physical exposure, a viral exposure, or even a psychological exposure, all stressors communicate in our body the same way. It's a buildup of a reactive oxygen species. So just like metal rusts, so does our tissue. And what that is, it's a removal of electrons. And this communicates what state that we're in. Our key proteins will actually change shape and function based on your stress level so that you can meet the moment. When
Okay.
you're stressed, these reactive oxygen species, these oxidizing or electron plucking substances, distribute through your system so that your cellular response, your organ response, and your behavioral response, again, meet that moment. When you're chronically stressed, this buildup of ROS locks up your main pathway for producing energy, the Krebs cycle. So Krebs locks up what's called succinate, you could forget that word if you like, sends out this messenger called the hypoxia-inducing factor 1 alpha. You can forget that word too. But what it does is it initiates inflammation and an alternate pathway for energy production that produces less reactive oxygen species. So regardless of what type of stress we have, our body responds in this way so that both metabolically and behaviorally we act appropriately.
Okay. That gives me the full picture of it. I love that. And I love that you have the terminology because somebody's going to watch this and they're going to be like, wait, is that actually a thing? So now you can
Exactly.
actually go and look it up. But also, Dr. Deb has put it into very simple terms for us here. And I think one of the terms that you and I were speaking about recently, as I talked about mindfulness and the connection to creativity, is you mentioned the default mode network, DMN. Can you explain in simple everyday language and relate it to us so I can know when is my default mode network active?
Your default mode network is active when you're in that narrative form of thought. So whenever you're thinking in words, creating stories in your mind about either what you're observing, what you're thinking, ruminating about the past, present, or future, that is your default mode network. Essentially, when you put a person into an MRI scanner, their mind starts to wander, and usually it's in this narrative form. And that's why they called it the default mode network. So by default, a person tends to go into that state. And let's take a moment to unpack what is this state. So these are observed regions in the brain that have similarities in the frequencies that they're active in, as measured originally by functional MRI, even by colleagues of mine that kind of pursued this field. as well now confirmed in other modalities like EEG and even MEG.
So is it fair to say that we spend a lot of our time in like that self-critical, direction towards looping thoughts or anxiety? Is that what's happening inside the brain? And MRI cases, like you said, but is that really the greater time of what's happening in our brain?
In our society, most people don't do mindfulness practices. The more mindfulness practices you do, the more you learn to quiet your mind and the less of that type of rumination you'll engage in. Mindfulness makes people happier. I was just looking at the science literature today on that. And my starting point was actually happy people live longer. So that was some science I stumbled on today in the medical literature.
So the mind is not broken. It might just be stuck in a certain state, and we can access that through mindfulness. And for me, of course, mindfulness, I think the easiest entry point is breath awareness because you can regulate that, right, easily. So, do we see something in our brain when we talk about, specifically breath work versus maybe meditation, or are these all looking kind of similar?
There's different types of meditation, but a lot of it being breath work tunes you into what's called the interoceptive network of your brain. So when you're looking inward, kind of observing your processes in a non-judgmental way, and this is sounding a lot like mindfulness, you go into a state that's different from your default mode network.
So we want to be out of the default mode network. That's the ruminating.
Well, hang on. I'll make it a little more accurate. I guess it makes it a little more dynamic and complex. So our brains are very much wired to categorize and quickly move on. It's a shortcut, right? In reality, you want a brain that is dynamic and can flow from one network to another. And the more networks that we're integrating, the more neurons we're using, which gets to what the brain looks like in a state of creativity. It's engaging more diverse neural networks and switching more adaptively to, again, meet the moment. And in this moment, it could be inspiration, creativity, innovation, what have you.
So it's more the density or the depth, the usage, the variety of it that is the part of the brain being healthy.
Mhm.
Oh,
And the breath work itself, not only when you do the breath work, do you start to go away from default mode network and into your interoceptive network, but also the inhale, if you breathe through your nose, will actually coordinate more neurons across diverse areas. So you're again recruiting more and more compute power.
I love having this conversation because I feel like I need a guide. I know it works. I understand the ancient science behind it, but I also just want to relate it back to in a very practical way. I talk about how in our inhales, you actually access a lot more energy. So you're bringing in energy, and the exhale is bringing the relaxation. Is there something that's happening differently in the brain during inhale, during exhale?
Yes, in the peak of the inhale, it sets the clock for the neural coordination.
Very interesting. And as you know, creativity is the core pillar of my work. And is there other stuff in science that show about creativity and well being?
When I cracked into the medical literature on this, I found very few papers that had looked at the full picture, but I could put together pieces that made me so profoundly interested and convinced that your method is powerful that I started my own creative practice and see it as important as exercise. And what I found was creativity enhances well-being, well-being enhances creativity. And the meditation, the mindfulness meditation, and the breath work all go hand in hand. So you have these three separate pillars that all support themselves. Imagine it like a water wheel where creativity pours into well-being, pours into creativity, etc. And the breath work is facilitating both of those processes, right? Recruiting more and more diverse neurons and different neural networks. So now you have this person who's very easily engaged in a flow state.
So is it the brain flexibility that's improving, or are we reducing stress chemistry, or are they all part of the same thing?
We're doing all of those things.
I see. People, I think, find that they're more themselves doing some creative practice, and that might even be something very simple that we don't think about. You know, I often will say that not everybody feels that they're a talented artist, but everybody has access to some creative expression. It could just be how you make your coffee in the morning is a creative expression, and that makes you feel more like yourself. So, is there a specific reason, looking at it again from the aspect of the brain, that we feel ourself, we feel connected to ourself when we express creatively?
I'm going to pull in one more thread here, and I'm going to speculate. I think it might be the emotional regulation that we get from creative expression. I would say the key may, in fact, be the emotional regulation. So not only does creative expression make you more smoothly transition and adapt and pull in other neural networks, but it also rewires your default mode network, creating more balance between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. The amygdala is more responsible for emotions, intensive emotions, whereas the prefrontal cortex is really your thinking brain. It's your rational brain. So the default mode network isn't bad. We need it. It's also part of how we run simulations, right? It's part of how we innovate. It's part of how we create. But by having a balance between your rational side and your emotional side, you have more control in stressful moments.
So is it fair to say that you, like I, would believe that creativity is medicine?
100%. I actually was talking to my mom yesterday. She's 78. My father passed a year ago, and she's doing fabulously. She's a very resilient person. And I was just saying to her, Mom, I think creative expression is as important as exercise. And she said, I believe that. She's a potter, for fun, and she does a lot of creative expression, and she always has. And she's a very in the flow type of person, very happy, very resilient.
I love that. That resonates so deeply because I often say that creativity is not a luxury, it's a lifeline.
100%. I have another example for you. There's another Deb who's part of Journeymetrics, and she has all of the autoimmune disease. Her grandparents were co-inventors of Teflon. A lot of toxic burden gets passed down even through placenta, etc. Anyways, she was having, health crises, etc. And her physical therapist said to her, Deb, I think you need to start drawing. And if you don't draw, you might die. And she was kidding, but she was totally serious. So the other Deb took up this practice where she would get 4 different pens and a pad, and she would just start to scribble, and she would turn the page and scribble and turn the page and scribble, really trying to just let it flow and not think about the output, but really engaging in the process. And I tried her method, and I will tell you, Rubina, within 5 minutes of getting in there, I could feel this warmth flow through my brain. And I bet you it was a release of BDNF, which is essentially brain fertilizer.
It sounds a lot like the creative reset neurographic line method that I happen to use along with meditation. And I see people have amazing results from it, a lot of stress relief and management from that.
And I say that's rewiring of the brain. Again, emotional regulation, being able to recruit more diverse networks, getting more coherence across your brain, and just really getting into the flow.
Well, I love all of the stuff that you've been sharing, and I would like to go a little bit deeper. Like, if somebody is stressed today, do you have a whole protocol that you would recommend? Breath work, meditation, creativity, nature? Like, what's your day look like? And give us a little, a walkthrough and a prescription.
Okay. Well, I can tell you, I have been through my own health challenges. And in combination with that and diving deep into the medical literature, I came up with like an operating framework. It's pretty simple. It's not necessarily a daily process, but it's just a continual process. So I had had my third concussion and I was having a hard time really doing everything. So I was having emotional dysregulation, cognitive deficit, my vision was impaired. I was in somebody else's brain. That's what it felt like. I learned to live by my mitochondria at that time. Mitochondria being the little bacteria that climbed into another cell and was able to continue to grow. We are mitochondrial-based life forms. So are plants, so are all the other animals, and even mushrooms. So we all share the same responses to stress, right? We're all using this reactive oxygen species and this redox. So reducing being the opposite of plucking electrons, so putting electrons back would be reducing. The redox being reducing and oxidizing. We all have redox signaling to respond to the moment. We also have the same pathways for cleaning up those signals. So the framework that I developed was stress falling on stress tissue initiates inflammation, disease, and aging. And this is biochemically. Stress falling on healthy tissue upregulates biochemically resilience to stress. So what I try to do is recognize when I'm undergoing stress, and when I'm done, I celebrate and I restore. So I try to balance my energy. I try to keep at least a 15% buffer, because if you exceed your allotted energy, you're going to do damage, especially, if you're over 35. I'm 46 at this point. So I was working with this framework. I knew I had a gene in my family that put me at high risk for ovarian cancer. I checked when I turned 45. In fact, I had it. I got sent to MRI within the week, and what they found was a larger than egg-sized tumor growing in my left atrium. So it was pulsing. It was almost, we saw it on the ultrasound, and it was literally dancing. There was the song Respect from Aretha Franklin playing in the cardiologist's office, and it was just hoot, right? Hoot, right?
Whoa.
So I'm a drummer. I've always been a drummer. And this thing was literally dancing in my heart.
Wow.
Within 10 days, I was in heart failure. They had to move up my scheduled surgery. I came back from that surgery like they've never witnessed. So I dealt with all of the unprocessed trauma, physical, mental, toxic. I eat joyfully, lots of plants, right? And they have all these phytonutrients that help them have stress resilience and also help us have stress resilience. So I'm a very joyful, rhythmic, creative, exploratory person. I have resisted using too much structure because I really rely on my adaptive processes, my ability to problem solve and create to navigate my days. I used oxytocin, that's that love hormone, to help me get through the tough moments, either through gazing at my partner's eyes, loving myself, being thankful, filled with gratitude for the care I was getting from the nurses. I held hands with nurses. I was hugging nurses, all to help me get through that stress in a healthy way and stay, again, in awe and gratitude rather than in fear. So as soon as you switch into fear, your cellular metabolism switches. So my day looks like trying to live by my mitochondria. I really enjoy getting outside early. I feel my mitochondria are vibing out with the mitochondria of the forest. And yes, forest bathing does, in fact, upregulate these stress resilience pathways. And I just try to live my day in as much flow as possible.
I think it's a key, like you mentioned, that awe and inspiration and bringing that to your life, but also like your whole story, your experience is there to create awe and inspiration for others to see, look at you vibrant, beautiful, and thriving, and how you got through this is really inspiring. So thank you for sharing that with us. If somebody was listening to this today and they were stressed, they're hearing your experience, your journey, knowing that there's a way to prepare yourself for the stresses that you have in life and to recover from it, I think is just super inspiring. Do you think that someone can appear successful outwardly while their biology is under chronic stress? Or do you think that that starts to eventually surface?
Well, I think in our society, we've been trained to build, preferably in an exponential fashion, the hockey stick trajectory, rather than building resilience. So I'm hoping we can start to shift as a society away from just chronic cortisol and more towards that oxytocin and try to build resilience by respecting the flex that is strategic rest and the flex that is creative expression and the flex that is finding the flow and your own thriving. To give another layer um, to the story I shared is I had just come through the head injury when my father got diagnosed with essentially a death sentence of a particular cancer. We found it after it had already metastasized. So as I was undergoing surgery, my father was in, the last phases of his life. He stuck around long enough to see me thriving. And his granddaughter actually had brain surgery the same week that I was having heart surgery. And,
Wow,
my
a lot.
parents, they never shamed me, just like you are with your son. I could tell. I met him. He's fabulous. They never shamed me. They allowed me to be who I am, which is such a gift. My adverse childhood event score, the ACE score, which also tracks with health and well-being, is like a 0. That's the childhood they gave me. And, my dad, he'd had chemo that week. And he walked all the way to my bedside just to be there.
Oh, that is so precious. And it really tells, I think, the full story of, like you said, your family, your life, the love that's been present there. And I'm sorry for
Oh,
your
it's
loss.
okay.
And
And
but
even
what a
even
precious moment, last
even the
final
loss,
moment.
even in the
Yeah,
loss, there was so much connection, so much beauty, so much joy, so much learning. I wouldn't trade those experiences for the world. He let me nurture him.
that's sweet.
It
Very
was.
sweet. Yeah. Yes. Yes. I think that, we all have these experiences, very human experiences that are so relatable. And I think that maybe we're not told or we're not taught to look for the signs and to navigate things when we need the help. Internally, was there something like I call this your inner design, right? Was there something internally that you knew was calling forth and to go through this trajectory, to go through the different stresses? What was that like for you?
Well, I'll tell you, when we met, and then I started doing the deep dive on the power of creativity and the breath work and the meditation. In that moment, I needed those tools. So that felt like a calling. It was a healing. It was in that first year of processing that kind of a loss, and it's really the biggest loss that I've experienced thus far. So the tools that were available to me because of the conversation that we had had one day at LA Tech Week, right? Um,
Yes, so we both were at the right place at the right time.
mhm.
Really, yes, and your all of the study that you have really helped me to feel more encouraged to bring the inner design method because you said to me, still remember when we first met, you said, the work you're doing is scientifically backed. I'm going to help you to prove it and to speak it. And so for those of you out in the audience who don't know, well, I'm writing a book and she's helping me write the scientific background part of it, the pieces. So you will absolutely feel and know that the inner design method is providing you something rich and meaningful to experience. And then also something, like you said, like the fertilizer for your brain, right? Your brain health to develop and grow.
I am not. I'm great with abstract photography, but I am not great with a pen or a brush or a pencil. And I've been going in ever since I started reading the literature. You can tell. I mean,
Yay. Look at
this is
that.
only like 6 months old, and I used up all that paint.
It's intimidating, I think, sometimes for people when I tell them or when they walk into a session and there's this nice journal and beautiful pens or this palette of colors and, oh my gosh. And I say, okay, I'm not expecting you to perform. We're not looking at the results. And often I would say, okay, whatever you do, there's a trash bin on your way out. If you hate it, it can go there. I'm not going to look at it. We're not going to judge it. We're not going to analyze it. Just be with me through the process. And I remember even once saying in a workshop that we're not here to create a masterpiece. We're just going to go through this process for, 30 minutes. At the end of that, somebody raised their hand and said, I think I did just create my masterpiece. Just that feeling of fulfillment and creativity. Of course, it's not necessarily that we have to look in our society. We think a masterpiece in art, it must be hanging at MoMA or something. But it was maybe that person's own feeling of connected to something that was beautiful. And beauty, I like to think, is not a concept. It's not a construct. Can you talk about that? Like, what is beauty to you personally? What does beauty mean?
So what do I think beauty is? I think that something that you observe that fundamentally resonates with you.
I love that because it's the same thing that I think mindfulness offers, the same two things that you're in observation, right? There's some part of you that's witnessing the breathing or the thoughts. There's you and there's the thoughts and there's that first realization that there's an observation. And then you said that fundamental part of it is that connection. So I think that's really, it's beautiful. But I think that creativity is more than these beauty standards or aesthetic. It's the process, the expression. That's what's creative. And to me, I think that's also beautiful, just being in the expression of something.
I was thinking, like, what do I find beautiful? Oftentimes it's things that are natural. I also like abstract work. The piece behind me is a Rodrigo Valenzuela. And one of the things that it does that I love about a lot of abstract work is that it can create this dimensional effect where you're actually increasing the space that you're in. So whether it's
The
spatial,
perspective, yes.
right? And like, why is that beautiful? I think because it almost makes your brain feel more free, more happy, it has more agency. But then also art that evokes very powerful emotions can be hideous but simultaneously beautiful.
Yes. I like the word freeing also. I like how you said that because I think innately, maybe we all are searching for freedom of expression, freedom to live how we want, freedom from the burdens, the things that weigh us down. And then where is that in the brain? What where's that part?
I've always felt the importance of agency. It's a word that I learned from the other Deb some decades ago. She's always concerned with these two words, space and agency. And I think that agency may look like creativity in the brain too, or again, you're having this ability to coordinate more diverse areas. It's probably a lot to do with your executive function, but it's also got to be a fundamental emotion. I haven't looked into the neuroscience of it, but I will tell you, I know that agency, again, a piece of literature I saw this morning, the feeling of agency is actually very important for longevity.
I'm excited to explore that a little more now. I'm a little bit more free. I just became an empty nester, although it's a different kind of freedom, I feel. When we talk about stress or collapse, are there subtle signs that we see maybe in the body before, we can't obviously see the things that are happening in the brain, but are there subtle signs that start asking for help before that collapse happens?
Definitely. For every individual, it's going to be different. For some folks, it's going to be more emotional volatility, more of a feeling of overwhelm. For some folks, it'll manifest as leaky gut, right? Your barriers start to lose their integrity. I guess when you get overwhelmed, that's just kind of that's like a good analogy or a description of what's happening.
Oh,
Also, inflammation. I don't do the Botox or do any of these things. Whenever I look at my face, if there's increased signs of aging, I know that that's a sign that there's something that's stressing me out, and I need to do more self-nurturing or resetting, or maybe it's going out into nature more, exercising more. It's these subtle cues that if we look for and adapt, that means we're actually getting into a state of flow. And in this case, the state of flow of taking care of oneself.
So I've heard actually that meditation increases, is it the telomeres at the end of your chromosomes actually elongate because over time they start to shorten, and that's how aging happens, but they actually reverse aging. So meditation is actually prolonging that longevity, but also youthfulness and all of that. Is it true?
I do think that the telomeres can lengthen more. I think most often what we see in times of chronic stress is that they will erode. There's this one protein called P53. Depending on your stress level, it'll do different things. If you're mildly stressed, it will actually protect your telomeres. If you're experiencing extreme or prolonged stress, it no longer protects the telomeres. So again, it goes back to that redox, so electron plucking, or so the rusting, if you will, of our whole system, be on the tissue level, the systems level, just across the board. This stress signal, this oxidizing force, that's stress, that's aging.
That's what's aging us, actually, guys. It's the stress that's aging us. So I think of the telomeres kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I always just put it back into like, elementary school level so I can understand it. Is like the end of the shoelace, the little plastic cap that keeps it from fraying. Is that right? Kind of like a thing that, a little piece that protects it.
Yeah, the mental imagery I'm getting is coming from biology books.
Yes.
But when your cells divide, you have to make a whole new copy of your DNA, and the end caps that pull apart when your cell is dividing, the ends of the end point there are that's the telomeres.
Okay. Okay.
But yes, the shoelace tips as we're dividing our cells.
I see. Got it. Got it. So I know you mentioned about the chronic stress, how it affects mood, relationships. How does that affect decision making? I see it all the time with clients, CEOs, and people who are leaders. For them, they kind of get to this decision fatigue.
Mm.
And I definitely say that, meditation, mindfulness, these kind of practices can help with that, give clarity, but on the scientific side of it.
Yeah, 100%. So when you're stressed, right, your cellular metabolism changes, but so does your behavioral status. So this again, it's IL-6. So clean up on IL-6 to me means if you don't take care of yourself and really prioritize, I live by a redox balance, right? It's a very jargony word, and I keep trying to explain it. Again, it's this kind of the plucking off of the electrons. When you let your redox go, the IL-6 floods your system and it makes you more antisocial. So when people keep asking you, decide this, I need this, help me this, how was your day, this, right? When your IL-6 is high, you don't want to have anything to do with that. You want to crawl into your own dark, cozy place and rest. And that's what your body's telling you to do.
And then that rest is actually going to help, I think, in turn, the decision making and all of that. And I think I'll chip in my little pieces. The rest that you get from sleeping is different from the rest you get from deep meditation. That, sometimes they say even like 40 minutes of meditation is equal to 4 hours of sleep. I don't know if it's actually scientifically, but I think that rest, that rejuvenation is what helps, that gives that clarity. All of a sudden you can jump out of meditation, or hopefully you don't jump out literally, but you're like, oh, I got this clarity. I realize now the answers kind of come down to you.
Right? When you're not overly stressed, you have more dynamic flexibility, right? Even just how the brain in the state of creativity has more dynamic flexibility. So you're able to more easily make good decisions with less friction. So again, it's being in that flow state. Whenever you have the second guessing, right? If you're ruminating, if you're questioning your own abilities, right? If you're not just in the flow state, you have a lot of emotional friction. It requires a lot more energy to do anything. And that's a lot of the literature that I saw when I was looking into inner design, is that by getting into those flow states, by increasing your emotional regulation, by having more adaptive neural networks and more recruited coherence across the brain, you're in a much lower energy output state, regardless of what you're mentally doing.
So burnout is not just emotional, although that's where you feel it. It can actually be biochemical.
It's that bidirectional door. It's that door that goes both ways. Whether it's your
Oh,
cells influencing your brain's influencing your cells, it's happening, right?
it's
And by
happening.
brain there, I meant like behavior. So cellular metabolism and behavior are so intertwined that it could be exposure to a bacteria or a virus, or it could just be some thought, some event that happened that you won't let go of. Either one of those things can have the equal effect on your health, well-being, and your decision-making process.
I love that. Thank you for simplifying that for all of us. I need to know what's really happening. We may see the results, like I've always seen the results, but to know where it actually stands in literature and science and research is really helpful. With all of your scientific knowledge, what has this work taught you personally about how to live well?
I think this says it all.
Yay, I love
Right.
that.
I'm not a visual artist, but I now see it as a responsibility to myself, to my children, to my family, to my community, to the world at large, that I practice creatively every day if I can, but at least once a week, preferably more like exercise. You want to have what, at least 3 to 5 times a week, right? It's important.
That that was exactly the question I was gonna ask you. What are your non-negotiables in your life? And you just basically said, your non-negotiable is to create, and I love that because to me, I ask on this podcast a lot of times, "What is your inner design?" But I know that your inner design is also the inner design, so I'm grateful for you proving this for us, in the scientific way. If every listener could improve one invisible system inside themselves this year, where should they begin? Is it creativity again?
I'm going to go with flow,
Okay, okay.
right? And I think,
Yes,
what is flow? And I haven't looked into the medical literature of this, but I do wonder if flow is that state of creative expression. So regardless of what you're doing, if you can get into that flow state.
perfect. And where can people learn more about your work and Journeymetrics? We'll put this in the show notes, we'll put your links, but if you could mention it here for everyone.
Yeah, I've started really going heavy on the Instagram. So I'm trying to flood that system with propaganda
Good
to
propaganda.
to support human flourishing. So Dr. Deb Rivera on the Instagram, and please follow me, because then we can start doing lives and have everybody jump in for these kinds of conversations. If you have a burning question or a topic you want to go in on. And one of the things I enjoy creatively is going into the medical literature and pulling out what's relevant in real time. But yeah, so if you could please join in there, that'd be fun. And then if you're looking to help to align your cellular metabolism and your behavior so that you can further optimize your processes or elevate your health, I am Chief Science Officer of a company called Nekee, Nekee. And we're actually trying to help people on an N of one basis, meaning like we take your biology, your lifestyle, your exposures, and we help you continue to elevate.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Deb, for being here and for proving the science of inner design. And I look forward to our future chats. And I hope that everyone stay in contact. And of course, read the book Inner Design when it comes out to read more on all these studies that Dr. Deb has done. So thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Rubina. And I just want to say a humongous thank you for giving me the insight of the power of creativity. It has transformed my life. It helped me through my dark moments, and it's allowing me to step up in our society as an elder for others, where I lead by example through promoting creativity, longevity, and well being.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.